Creep Night, sure to send a chill down your spine. Welcome to Creep Night. In tonight's episode, we are going to see if we have learned the moral of these stories. So sit back and relax, and let's dive deep into Creep Night's moral of the story. The bird on Old Mayhill. Once lived a bird on Old Mayhill who ate Mary berries and sang every morning. He sat very high in an old May tree, and he ate all the berries he could carry. An old woman named Little May decided she too would try the mayberry. She went plucking away until dusk hit the sky. She carried the basket full of mayberry. She sat them on the table, ripe and clean, ready to start making a mayberry pie. She smashed the dough and sang the tune. She filled the pie with the mayberry, soon to cook, and to have a taste with delight. She sang out loud. The bird sang with her as she began to bake. Later in the evening, she would indeed have a taste. The pie had cooked through and through. The bird on the window began to sing louder and louder, and the cooling time began to lower. Soon, Little May would have her first bite. Little May grabbed a fork and struck the bite in her mouth. She did disclaim. Soon she would lay dead as a doornail, for the mayberry was such a delightful bite. The moral of this story, if I may, don't eat the mayberry, or you too may end up with a delightful dead bite. The girl who lived near the sea. There once was a girl who lived near the sea. She never did listen to her mother. She ventured out into the sea. She went a little too far, as you can see. The girl became lost in the sea. She followed all the lights toward the shore, but never got out of the sea. Her mother began to worry as the tides in the sea became very deadly. As you can see, soon the girl met with such an end, never to return from the dreaded sea. The moral of the story is, if you see, listen, and you might be able to escape a dreadful sea. A girl with ribbons. There once was a girl who wore a lot of ribbons in her hair. She loved each one. The ribbon began to tangle in her hair. She never did take care. One of the ribbons began to tear. She never did take care of her ribbon hair. Soon all the other ribbons would soon begin to flare. She never did take care of her ribbon hair. Soon all of the ribbon would fall in a flare until she had no hair. The moral of this hairful tale is to take care of your ribbon hair, or you too may end up with a flare. The kid who talked too much. There once lived a kid who talked and talked. He never could stop. His mouth would go a mile an hour. No matter how his mother tried, she never could get him to be quiet. His mouth would move up and down. One day his mouth grew so tired from all his talking. He talked and talked throughout his class, and he drove his teachers mad. The teacher told him, "One day you will talk so much that your mouth will fall off." The teacher hadn't been wrong, for one day, as the boy began to talk, his mouth did indeed fall. His eyes grew wide at his mouth that just laid on the floor, moving, but no sound did come. The moral of this story, if you can say, please be quiet every now and then, and maybe then your mouth won't fall off. A red rose. There once was a red rose. The rose sat in the window. It grew withered. Almost every day its thorns grew wide and long. The rose perked up in the morning and rested in the evening. One day, a small, tiny child decided she would pluck the rose. She rose her small hand to the rose where it did lay. She plucked the rose. That very same day, a thorn nestled into her thumb. The girl screamed out loud as the blood landed on the ground. As she looked, she saw a new rose begin to form. It began with her feet, turning into a green, windy stem, and so did the rest follow. She soon would be a rose. The moral of this story, a rose nestled in the morning can give such a thorn. The man who drank. There once lived a man who liked to drink. He drank through the evening, through the night. The bottle grew empty with such a fright, but this would not make him stray. Soon another bottle did the man drink. The bottle began to grow empty. The man drank and drank. He soon did get placed in a bottle. There is a moral to this story. If you drink, beware, for you too may up in a bottle of despair. The dirty woman. Once lived a woman, dirty as can be. She never took showers. Her daughter begged and pleaded with her mother to please take a shower. The woman just continued to sit around as dirty as she could be. Her skin turned a nasty gray. Flies buzzed around her. She didn't take a shower, as you can see. Her hair was all greasy from head to shoulders, but this hadn't bothered her since she hadn't taken a shower. Soon her skin all began to crack and boil over. She still didn't take a shower, even after her daughter cried out, "Please, take a shower!" Her smell stunk up the room. Rows of people flapped over. Everywhere she went, mothers began to cry with such a horrible sight. The woman's skin began to double in size. It hadn't looked at all like skin, but a giant boil. Soon there would be nothing left of the woman. Soon the boil would take over. The woman began to shed a few tears, but her daughter looked at her hopelessly and told her, "I told you to take a shower." There was nothing left of the woman. She had fully turned into a giant boil. The moral of this story is, if you begin to boil, please take a shower. The staring jare. There once was a woman who liked to stare. One day she met her match with the eye-staring jare. He stared and stared until she began to glare. Her eyes began to twinge, such a horrible twinge. But this did not stop her from her stare. The woman stared and stared, but the jare refused to stop the stare. He continued to stare and stare. The woman's face began to turn a bright red. Her eyes began to water, but this wouldn't stop her stare. She continued to stare and stare. The jailer continued his stare without any glares in his stare. He continued throughout the day. He continued into the night. The woman began to grow weary, but this, too, would not stop her stare. It had been the stroke of midnight that the stare in her eyes began to glaze over, and she couldn't move her eyes. Her eyes burned and twinged left and right, but the jailer stared and stared. She stared so deep into the jailer's eyes, soon she too would be dead from the stare. The moral of this story, if you dare, is to be careful at who you stare at, for you too may end up with a frightful stare. Mr. Alligator. There once were 5 little monkeys hanging from a tree by the riverside, picking on the alligator named, as you guessed it, Mr. Alligator. They would sway back and forth, calling out the alligator, "You can't eat me!" One day Mr. Alligator was swimming when he had seen one little monkey a little too low down the tree. And as all the other monkeys were hollering, "You can't eat me!" Mr. Alligator reached up and snapped his jaws at one of the monkeys. In horror, the other 4 monkeys had watched hopelessly as one of the monkeys had been swallowed up whole. 4 little monkeys remained in the tree. They all started shouting at Mr. Alligator, "Please don't eat me!" Mr. Alligator, all full from what he had just eaten, just swam away, only to return the very next day. 4 little monkeys hanging in the tree all started shouting, "You can't eat me!" One of the monkeys, thinking he was safe, was indeed too low in the tree. Mr. Alligator wasted no time and reached up and snapped his jaws on the uninspected monkey. All the other monkeys gazed in horror as their monkey brother was eaten up whole. They all started shouting, "Mr. Alligator, please don't eat me!" Once again, Mr. Alligator swam on his way, fuller than he was the other day. Mr. Alligator returned the very next day. 3 little monkeys were hanging from a tree, shouting, "You can't eat me!" One of the monkeys, swaying tree to tree, lost his grip and fell into the jaws of Mr. Alligator. Snap shut his jaws. The 2 other monkeys watched in horror, then began to shout, "Please, Mr. Alligator, don't eat me!" Mr. Alligator began to feel sleepy and swam away because he had been very nice and full. Later, Mr. Alligator returned the very next day, and the 2 little monkeys, swinging from tree to tree, began to shout as loud as they could, "You can't eat me!" One of the monkeys began to chant so hard he lost focus on what he had been doing. He landed near the branch, but too far down the tree. Snap! Went Mr. Alligator's jaws. The one little monkey began to cry and howl, "Please, oh please, Mr. Alligator!" Snap! Went Mr. Alligator's jaws. Before the monkey could even finish his tune, then there were no more monkeys swaying tree to tree. The moral to this story, if you see Mr. Alligator coming, please do not tease, for you may be the next to be snapped between his teeth. Well, I hope you all learned some important morals from these stories. Thank you for listening to Creep Night.